Welcome back to the quarterly call. All content is for informational purposes and is not investment advice. Please consult with an investment professional. So let's say you're prepping for a meeting with a tech investor. You need to sound in the know about ASML. It's the company behind the tech that makes our smartphones and AI possible. But their future's kind of tied to some big market shifts. And we've got some fresh intel from their head of investor relations, Skip Miller, straight from the UBS Global Technology and AI Conference, December 4th, 2024. So we're going to break down what he had to say. So the backdrop here is the semiconductor industry is seeing a slower than anticipated recovery this year. What does this mean for ASML in 2025? Plus, we got those new export controls impacting their business with China. Lots to unpack. Let's start with ASML's performance this year. It's been a year dominated by AI, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. That sector has been a driving force. Meanwhile, the more traditional segments like PCs and mobile phones, those haven't quite bounced back as we expected.
So a bit of a mixed bag there. What does that mean for ASML's bottom line?
Well, they're still projecting revenue around $28 billion for 2024, which is pretty impressive considering we have to remember they're selling those incredibly complex EUV high-NA machines. But it's not all rosy. Their gross margin is actually expected to be a touch lower than last year.
Okay, so a little bit of pressure on profitability. Now, everyone's curious about their outlook for 2025. Is ASML expecting a turnaround, or are we in for a bumpy ride?
Well, initially they were quite bullish, forecasting revenue between 30 and 40 billion for 2025, but they've recently adjusted that to a range of 30 billion to 35 billion.
Interesting. So they're tapping the brakes a little bit. What's driving that shift?
A few things. Those sluggish traditional markets we talked about, those are definitely playing a role. There's also some competitive dynamics at play in the foundry segment, particularly with those leading edge nodes,
Yeah.
which are taking longer to develop than expected. So it's like some projects are being pushed back, meaning that anticipated revenue is sliding to the right on the timeline.
Okay, so delays and a bit of a wait-and-see approach. But there's another big question looming China. Those new export controls announced on December 2nd, 2024, how is that going to impact ASML? Especially considering China was such a key market for them.
It's a valid concern. What we heard is that they're projecting China to account for about 20% of their total revenue in 2025. Now remember, this includes both systems and installed base business.
20%, that's a significant chunk. But I can't help but think that before all this export control drama, they had much grander ambitions for the Chinese market, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. That's why this 20% figure is raising some eyebrows. Earlier this year, there were some serious concerns that these new regulations could decimate ASML's China business.
So how are they managing to maintain a decent share of the Chinese market despite these limitations? Is it all just pent-up demand?
Pent-up demand is definitely part of it. They're still fulfilling some of those previous orders. But the bigger picture is this. Global demand for ASML's technology is so incredibly strong that they have some wiggle room in terms of how they allocate production capacity. That gives them a buffer, even with these new controls.
So even with these export controls, they're not feeling the pinch as much as some anticipated.
Exactly. Their backlog of orders from other regions, particularly those fueled by the AI boom, it's giving them some breathing room. And speaking of AI, it's a bit like the elephant in the room. It feels like every tech conversation these days leads back to AI.
It's true. But is it all hype? Or is this something ASML can truly bank on for sustained growth?
From what we're hearing, it's not just hype. This is a genuine shift. The sector is in its infancy. Think of it like a rocket just starting to lift off. And even before we fully grasp the potential of edge AI applications, demand for the advanced chips that power AI is skyrocketing.
And that's where ASML comes in, right? They're essentially selling the picks and shovels to the AI gold rush.
A perfect analogy. And it's not just about the logic chips that power the heavy lifting of AI training and development. It's about the memory systems that can keep up with all that data processing. They're seeing a surge in demand for advanced memory chips too, particularly DRAM.
Right, because all that data crunching needs somewhere to live.
Okay.
So it's not just about faster processors, it's about the memory that can keep pace.
Exactly. We're talking about those cutting-edge memory technologies like DDR and HBM. Those are essential for the high-performance computing that AI demands.
Okay, so AI is a clear win for ASML. But what about the memory market more broadly? What's the outlook there?
ASML reported some record-high order numbers earlier this year, and the memory sector played a big role in that. This was largely driven by the adoption of EUV in DRAM, particularly for HBM, which, as we discussed, is very much tied to AI.
So that surge in memory orders, it was almost like a preview of the potential impact of AI on this sector. But is that momentum continuing, or was it a blip?
That's the million-dollar question. And unfortunately, the answer isn't crystal clear. Those subsequent memory orders haven't been as strong, but that doesn't necessarily mean things are going south.
Right, because ASML has always been upfront about their order patterns being a bit lumpy. It all depends on factors like customer timing and specific project needs.
Exactly. So while that initial AI-driven surge was exciting, the long-term health of the memory market really depends on a broader recovery in those traditional segments, your PCs and your mobile phones.
So we're back to waiting for the rest of the tech world to catch up. But let's shift gears and talk about ASML's long-term vision. They're not just thinking about the next quarter, they're looking years, even decades ahead. What did we hear about their outlook for 2026 and beyond? Are they feeling bullish, or are there storm clouds gathering?
Well, they haven't released specific guidance for 2026 yet, but their tone is optimistic. They see significant growth opportunities on the horizon.
That's encouraging. What's giving them that confidence? Is it just faith in the relentless march of technology? Or is there something more concrete underpinning their optimism?
It's not just blind faith. There are some solid signs. Firstly, those secular growth drivers, AI being a major one, remain strong. We've already established that AI is a game changer and its influence will only grow in the coming years. Secondly, while the current recovery cycle is taking a bit longer than expected, they see it as an indication of pent-up demand, which could actually fuel even stronger growth down the line.
Okay, so it's like a coiled spring. Once it releases, it could really take off. What's the third sign?
Their customers are continuing to invest in building new fabrication plants, and that signals confidence in the future demand for semiconductors. All those new fabs are going to need to be filled with ASML's machines. It's a big vote of confidence.
That makes sense. But beyond these overall growth projections, there's this perennial question that always comes up with ASML, their pricing power. They practically have a monopoly on some of the most advanced technologies.
Yeah.
Does that mean they can just dictate prices and customers have to comply?
It's a little more nuanced than that. ASML maintains a value-based pricing strategy, regardless of how many customers they have or how dominant they are in the market.
So they're not just leveraging their monopoly to squeeze customers.
Not at all. They understand that their long-term success relies on strong relationships with their customers and delivering genuine value for the price they're charging.
Okay, fair enough. So what exactly is this value proposition they're offering? What makes their systems worth the hefty price tag?
It boils down to three key pillars: imaging, overlay, and productivity.
Imaging, overlay, productivity. Let's break those down.
Yeah.
Starting with imaging. What does that really mean in the context of chip making?
Think about those tiny features on chips. The things that make them faster, more powerful, more efficient. That's where ASML's EUV technology really shines. They're pushing the boundaries of what's physically possible, enabling the creation of chips with features measured in nanometers.
So they're the masters of miniaturization.
You could say that. And that miniaturization translates directly into more transistors on a chip, which means more processing power, better energy efficiency, and ultimately more capable devices.
I see. So imaging is about pushing the limits of what's possible on the chip itself. But what about overlay? I'm picturing something layered on top, but I'm guessing it's a bit more complicated.
You're right, it's about precision. Those chips can have dozens, even hundreds of layers, and each one needs to be perfectly aligned with the others down to a few nanometers.
Wow. Aligning things on a scale that's basically invisible.
Exactly. ASML's overlay technology ensures incredible accuracy for each layer, which directly impacts chip performance and the yield during manufacturing.
Right, because if those layers are even slightly misaligned, the chip won't work properly. That means wasted resources and lost profits for their customers.
Precisely. Overlay is all about maximizing precision and minimizing errors in the chip-making process.
Got it. So we've covered imaging, which is about miniaturization,
Right.
and overlay, which is about precision. What about that third pillar, productivity? That one seems pretty straightforward.
You're right, this one is more intuitive. Productivity is about how many wafers ASML systems can process in a given time. More wafers mean lower costs per chip, and that keeps their customers happy.
Makes sense. It's all about efficiency and scale.
Exactly. And ASML is constantly innovating to improve the throughput of their systems, helping their customers produce more chips, faster, and more cost-effectively.
Okay, so those are the three pillars: imaging, overlay, and productivity. But are all customers treated equally? Do they all get the same price for these cutting-edge systems?
That's a great question, and something they were very clear about. All customers get the same starting price, whether it's a basic deep UV machine or a top-of-the-line EUV system.
So no preferential treatment or special deals?
Nope. It's all about transparency and fairness. They understand that maintaining trust with all their customers is crucial for their continued success.
And that long-term thinking is also reflected in their approach to the future of the semiconductor industry. Let's talk about ASML's big picture vision. What are they predicting for 2030 and beyond? Are they expecting a world of ever-shrinking transistors? Or are they preparing for a future where Moore's law finally hits a wall?
Based on their projections, they're betting on continued growth in the semiconductor industry, driven by advancements in both logic and memory technologies.
So no signs of the innovation engine sputtering out anytime soon.
Not at all. In fact, they foresee a long runway for EUV adoption, including the eventual arrival of Hyper-NA technology. Think of it as EUV on steroids.
Hyper-NA. That sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
It does, doesn't it? But it's real, and ASML is actively developing it. It promises to push chip miniaturization even further.
They're clearly bullish on EUV, both now and in the future. But what about the memory landscape? Things seem a bit more uncertain there, especially as we look beyond 2030.
That's true. While ASML sees a clear path for logic technology for the next decade or so, the exact trajectory for memory technology beyond 2030 is a bit hazy.
It's like they have a detailed map for the next few miles, but after that, the train gets unpredictable.
Exactly. But here's the key takeaway. Even though they don't have all the answers about what memory technologies will dominate in the 2030s, they're confident that continuous innovation will push things further than we might imagine.
It's a we don't know what we don't know situation. But history has shown us that human ingenuity often finds a way to overcome seemingly insurmountable technological barriers.
You got it. ASML is positioning itself to be at the forefront of whatever breakthroughs emerge. They're not just passively waiting for the future, they're actively shaping it.
So despite the uncertainty around specific memory technologies, ASML is still projecting some impressive revenue numbers for 2030. What are they aiming for?
They're targeting a range of $44 billion to $60 billion in revenue in 2030, with a gross margin between 56% and 60%. Even with the uncertainties, they're anticipating significant growth over the next decade.
Those are ambitious goals, but it sounds like they have a solid foundation to build on.
They do, but there's one specific area of their memory market outlook that's worth unpacking.
DRAM. Okay, what's the story with DRAM? They're anticipating strong growth there, right?
That's right.
Largely fueled by the AI boom we talked about.
Yes, but there's a slight disconnect between ASML's optimistic long-term projections for DRAM growth and some of the more cautious near-term commentary coming from their customers, particularly the memory chip manufacturers themselves.
Interesting. So ASML is painting a rosy picture for DRAM, but the companies actually making those chips aren't quite as enthusiastic. Is that what we're hearing?
That's the gist of it. It boils down to a difference in perspective. ASML is looking at the big picture, focusing on the long-term trends, while some of their customers are laser-focused on the immediate challenges and uncertainties they're grappling with right now.
Got it. So not necessarily a contradiction, just different time horizons.
Exactly. And it's an important distinction for investors to keep in mind when they're evaluating ASML's projections and comparing them to what they're hearing from other players in the industry.
So even though there are some nuances and differing viewpoints within the memory market, ASML's overall message seems pretty clear. They're confident in the long-term growth of the semiconductor industry, and they see themselves as a key enabler of that growth.
Absolutely. But there's one more technical detail from Skip Miller's presentation that often comes up in conversations about ASML's business, and it's worth highlighting: litho intensity.
Litho intensity. Remind me, what exactly is that, and why should we care?
Think of it this way. Litho intensity refers to how much money is spent on lithography equipment, which is ASML's bread and butter, as a percentage of the overall spending on semiconductor manufacturing equipment. We call this wafer front-end equipment, or WFE for short.
So it's a way of measuring how important ASML's technology is within the bigger picture of semiconductor manufacturing.
Exactly. And as you might expect, ASML likes to show investors how their EUV litho spending is trending.
That makes sense. They want to highlight the growing importance of their technology. But did they give any concrete numbers on litho intensity as a percentage of WFE?
Well, they admitted that calculating that exact percentage would require insight into non-litho spending, which isn't really their area of expertise. But they did give specific figures on their EUV litho spend CAGR, that's the compound annual growth rate.
Okay, so even though they didn't have a precise litho intensity percentage, they did offer hard numbers on how their slice of the pie is growing.
That's right. Investors can use those CEGA figures to assess ASML's growth relative to other industry metrics like WFE or overall semiconductor revenue.
Got it. Even without the complete picture, we can still get a sense of ASML's trajectory within the broader industry. Now let's talk about one of the most exciting technologies on ASML's roadmap. Something potentially game-changing. I'm talking about high-NA technology.
High NA. This is where things get really futuristic.
Okay, I'm hooked. Give me the elevator pitch. What is it and why all the excitement?
Imagine taking everything amazing about EUV and amplifying it. That's high NA. It's about streamlining the chip manufacturing process, boosting chip performance, and pushing the limits of miniaturization even further.
It sounds like a triple win. But how does it actually work? What makes high-NA different from the EUV we have today?
One of the key advantages of high NA is its ability to replace the complex and costly double patterning process currently used with EUV low NA.
Hold on. What's double patterning and why is it a problem?
Think of it as a workaround. Chip makers use it to achieve the superfine features needed for advanced chips. It involves using EUV low NA twice, which adds complexity, time, and cost to the manufacturing process.
So it's like having to trace the same line twice to get the desired precision, not very efficient.
Exactly. High NA can achieve that same level of precision in a single step, making double patterning obsolete.
Okay, that makes sense. Simplifying the process means fewer errors, faster production, and ultimately lower costs. But does high-NA improve chip performance?
Absolutely. High NA not only simplifies manufacturing, but it also allows for the creation of even smaller and more densely packed transistors. And as we know, smaller transistors typically translate into faster and more energy-efficient chips.
It's a two-for-one deal. It makes the chips themselves better and makes manufacturing them easier and cheaper.
Exactly. It's easy to see why there's so much excitement surrounding this technology.
I'm sold. When can we expect to see it hit the market? Still years away or just around the corner?
The timeline looks promising. ASML's high NA systems are already generating a lot of interest from customers in both the logic and memory segments, and they're projecting volume production to begin around 2026-2027.
Not too far off. But are all of ASML's customers equally eager to embrace high-NA? Or are some hesitant, maybe waiting to see how the technology develops?
Interestingly, there seems to be a shift in the adoption pattern compared to previous EUV generations.
Tell me more. What's different this time around?
Historically, the early adopters of new EUV technologies have been the logic chip makers, with the memory folks following a bit later.
Makes sense. The companies pushing the absolute limits of processing power would be the first to jump on the newest, most expensive tech.
Exactly. But with high NA, the gap between logic and memory adoption appears to be shrinking.
So memory chip makers aren't waiting as long this time. What's driving that change?
It likely comes down to the clear benefits that high NA offers, particularly in terms of productivity and yield improvement.
Right, because even though memory chips might not need the absolute bleeding-edge transistor sizes that logic chips demand, they still benefit from a more efficient and cost-effective manufacturing process.
Exactly. And that's why ASML is seeing strong demand for high NA systems from both segments of the market.
Okay, so high-NA is shaping up to be a major catalyst for the semiconductor industry, unlocking even more advanced chips and reshaping the manufacturing landscape.
Absolutely. And ASML is well positioned to be the primary beneficiary of this technological leap.
But beyond just the technical aspects and market forecasts, there's something fascinating about how ASML operates, this blend of pragmatism and visionary thinking.
It's fascinating how they balance their focus on delivering tangible value to their customers today with their ambition to push the boundaries of what's possible in the future.
It's like they have one foot firmly planted in the present, executing their current roadmap, and the other foot taking bold steps into the unknown, exploring uncharted territory.
A great way to put it. They're not just reacting to the market, they're shaping it.
That's what makes them such a compelling company to follow. Well, I think it's time to take a quick pause. When we come back, we'll delve deeper into ASML's business and explore some of the broader trends shaping the future of the semiconductor industry. Don't go away.
Welcome back.
Before the break, we were talking about ASML's knack for delivering value today while pushing those boundaries of what's possible tomorrow. You know, it's this kind of duality that makes them so fascinating.
Indeed, it's impressive how they manage to play both a short and a long game and excel at both. But with all this talk of ambitious long-term projections, one can't help but wonder, are they overly reliant on Moore's law holding true?
Ah, yes, Moore's law. It's that observation that's guided the semiconductor industry for decades. You know that idea that the number of transistors on a microchip doubles roughly every 2 years, leading to those exponential increases in computing power? But a lot of experts believe that Moore's law is slowing down, perhaps even like reaching its limits.
Right, and if Moore's law does hit a wall, what does that mean for a company like ASML, whose entire business model is built around enabling ever-increasing chip complexity and miniaturization?
That's the billion-euro question. But here's the thing. I don't think ASML is just sitting back and waiting to see what happens with Moore's law. They seem to be actively working on technologies that could extend its lifespan, or perhaps even redefine what Moore's law means in the future.
That's a crucial point. They're not passive bystanders. What are some examples of how they're approaching this?
Well, we already talked about high-NA technology, which is like a prime example of how they're pushing the limits of lithography, enabling even smaller and more densely packed transistors. But they're exploring other avenues as well, like directed self-assembly or DSA.
SA. That sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
Okay, so it's a completely different approach to chip patterning. Instead of using light-to-etch patterns onto a silicon wafer like traditional lithography, DSA harnesses those self-assembling properties of certain materials to create those patterns.
So it's like harnessing the power of nature to build chips.
In a way, yeah. It's similar to how molecules naturally arrange themselves into specific structures. With DSA, chip makers could potentially create incredibly complex and precise patterns at a fraction of the cost and complexity of traditional lithography.
That's groundbreaking stuff. But is DSA just a theoretical concept, or is it something that could realistically be used in chip manufacturing soon?
It's still early days, but ASML is investing heavily in DSA research. Some experts believe it could play a key role in extending Moore's law, or even open up entirely new avenues for chip design and manufacturing.
So even if traditional lithography eventually hits its limits, ASML is already looking at alternative paths to keep the industry moving forward.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that really stood out to me. They're not just a lithography company, they're an innovation company. They're constantly looking for new ways to push the boundaries of what's possible.
That's a good point. They're not limiting themselves to a single approach.
Speaking of pushing boundaries, let's get back to the memory market. We talked about how ASML's long-term projections for DRAM growth seem to clash with that more cautious near-term outlook from some of their customers. But there's another layer to the memory market story that's worth exploring. Those different types of DRAM and how they're evolving to meet the demands of AI and other data-intensive applications.
This is where it gets really interesting. We've touched on HBM, or high bandwidth memory, which is designed specifically for the extreme data needs of AI. But there are other types of DRAM that are also evolving to keep pace with this data-driven world.
Give me the GRM rundown. What are the key players and what are their strengths and weaknesses?
Sure. Alongside HBM, you have the kind of workhorse of the DRAM world, DDR, or double data rate memory. It's the standard DRAM found in most computers and servers. And within the DDR family, you have different generations, with DDR5 being the latest and greatest.
Right, DDR5, the faster, more efficient successor to DDR4.
Right.
But how does DDR5 compare to HBM in the context of AI and high-performance computing?
That's a question a lot of chip makers are wrestling with. While HBM provides like unparalleled bandwidth for those demanding AI workloads, it comes at a higher cost and is more complex to implement. DDR5, on the other hand, is a more mature and cost-effective technology, and it's making significant strides in terms of bandwidth and performance.
So HBM is the performance king, but DDR5 is the value champion.
You got it. The choice between the two often depends on that specific application and the balance between performance requirements and, budget constraints.
But it's not just a two-horse race, right? There are other memory technologies emerging, like GDDR or graphics double data rate memory, which is specifically designed for GPUs.
You're right. The memory landscape is constantly evolving, and GDDR is another important player, especially as GPUs become increasingly crucial for AI and other data-intensive tasks.
Okay, so we've got HBM for extreme bandwidth, DDR5 for a balance of performance and cost, and GDDR for graphics-heavy workloads. But how do these different types of DRAM impact ASML's business? Do they require different lithography equipment or processes?
That's a great question. And the answer is, it depends. While all of these DRAM technologies are based on the same fundamental principles, those specific manufacturing processes can vary depending on the desired performance characteristics and that complexity of the memory architecture.
So ASML needs to be adaptable to meet those evolving needs of their customers across a wide range of memory technologies.
Absolutely. And that's why they invest so heavily in research and development, staying ahead of the curve and ensuring they have the tools and technologies to support their customers' innovations.
It's like they're building a toolbox that's constantly expanding and evolving to meet those ever-changing demands of the semiconductor industry.
That's a great analogy. And that toolbox includes not just the lithography systems themselves, but also that software, metrology tools, and other support systems that are, crucial for creating those incredibly complex and sophisticated chips.
It's amazing how much innovation and expertise goes into making those tiny devices that power our world.
It really is. And ASML is at the heart of it all, enabling the creation of the chips that drive everything from, our smartphones and laptops to data centers and self-driving cars.
So even though there's uncertainty about specific technologies and roadmaps, one thing seems clear. The demand for ever more powerful and efficient chips is only going to grow.
I completely agree. And as long as that demand exists, ASML is well positioned to benefit, riding that wave of innovation and pushing those boundaries of what's possible in the semiconductor industry.
But there's another aspect of ASML's business that's worth highlighting, and it ties back to that theme of long-term thinking and strategic vision we discussed earlier.
I'm all ears. What haven't we covered yet?
Their approach to sustainability. In an industry that's often associated with high energy consumption and environmental impact, ASML is taking steps to reduce their footprint and help their customers do the same.
That's a critical point. Sustainability is no longer a nice to have, it's a must have, especially for companies operating in industries with significant environmental impacts.
Exactly. And ASML seems to get that. They're taking a proactive approach to integrating sustainability into their operations and product development.
So, what are they actually doing? Are they just making small improvements or are they pursuing more ambitious changes?
It's a combination of both. They're focused on reducing their own energy consumption and emissions, but they're also working on developing more energy-efficient lithography systems and partnering with their customers to optimize that whole chip manufacturing process for sustainability.
So, it's not just about making their own operations greener, it's about helping the entire semiconductor ecosystem become more sustainable.
Precisely. And that's where things get really interesting. It shows how a company like ASML can use their position and influence to drive positive change throughout the industry.
It's a prime example of how sustainability can be a source of innovation and competitive advantage rather than just a cost or a compliance burden.
Absolutely. And it's something investors are increasingly paying attention to. They're looking for companies that are not only financially successful, but also environmentally responsible.
And ASML seems to be ticking both of those boxes, positioning themselves as a leader in both technology and sustainability.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Let's take a moment to reflect on everything we've learned about ASML and consider what it all means for the future of the semiconductor industry. We've seen how ASML is navigating a complex landscape of shifting market dynamics, technological advancements, and geopolitical uncertainties. They're clearly a company that's thinking long-term, investing heavily in innovation, and striving to create a more sustainable future for the industry. But perhaps the most important takeaway is this. ASML's success is not just about building incredible machines. It's about understanding the needs of their customers, anticipating the future of technology, and constantly pushing those boundaries of what's possible.
Welcome back. It's been quite a journey exploring ASML's world, hasn't it?
It has. We've covered a lot of ground from their technology and market outlook to their commitment to sustainability. But before we wrap up, I think it's worth pondering what ASML's success says about the bigger trends shaping the semiconductor industry and even the future of technology as a whole.
I agree. Their story offers some valuable insights. What stands out to you?
Well, for one, ASML's dominance really highlights that growing importance of specialization and mastery in an increasingly complex technological world.
That's a great point. They've carved out this niche for themselves as that leading provider of the most advanced lithography equipment. And they haven't just dabbled, they've gone all in, building up a level of expertise that's practically unmatched.
It's like they've created a fortress around their business, a moat that protects them from competition and allows them to capture a huge share of the profits in the semiconductor industry.
Exactly. And that brings us to another key takeaway, that growing concentration of power and influence within the semiconductor industry. ASML's success, along with a handful of other giants like TSMC and Samsung, suggests that the industry is becoming increasingly dominated by a few major players.
And that concentration has some significant implications, both for the industry itself and for the global economy, doesn't it?
Absolutely. On one hand, this concentration can lead to greater efficiency and innovation because these large companies have the resources and scale to invest heavily in R&D and really push technology forward.
It's like having a few powerful engines driving that whole industry train.
That's a good analogy. But on the other hand, this concentration also raises concerns about potential bottlenecks and vulnerabilities as the industry becomes more reliant on a small number of companies for essential components and technologies. The risks become more concentrated as well.
It's a classic double-edged sword. Greater efficiency and innovation, but also, potential weaknesses and dependencies.
Exactly. And that's why we're seeing governments around the world paying so much attention to semiconductor policy these days. They're trying to find that right balance between encouraging innovation and ensuring resilience in this critically important industry.
It's a tightrope walk for sure. But let's zoom out even further and think about the broader implications of ASML's story for the future of technology as a whole. What's the big takeaway here?
I think ASML's journey highlights a fundamental truth about innovation. It's often driven by incremental progress rather than sudden massive breakthroughs.
I see what you mean. ASML hasn't been making huge leaps every few years. Instead, they've been steadily improving their core technology year after year, decade after decade, and that approach has obviously paid off.
It has. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most groundbreaking advancements come from, consistent, persistent effort.
It's like that saying, overnight success is usually the result of years of hard work and dedication behind the scenes.
Exactly. ASML is a testament to the power of that sustained and disciplined approach to innovation. They haven't been chasing headlines or trying to reinvent the wheel. They've been focused on steadily improving their core technology, and it's brought them remarkable success.
So it's not always about trying to predict that next big thing. It's about creating the right conditions for continuous incremental progress.
Precisely. And that's a valuable lesson for anyone involved in innovation, whether you're a startup founder, a corporate executive, or a government official. The future of technology is likely to be shaped not by a few grand pronouncements or singular inventions, but by those collective efforts of countless individuals and organizations working tirelessly to push those boundaries of what's possible.
Even though we can't predict exactly what the future holds, ASML's story gives us reason to be optimistic. That same spirit of innovation that has driven their success will likely continue to shape the technological landscape for many years to come.
I couldn't agree more. And that's an exciting thought. It reminds us that the future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we actively create through our collective ingenuity and determination.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on. It's been an insightful look into ASML, a company that's not only a technological powerhouse, but also a reflection of the forces shaping the future of innovation.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Quarterly Call. For more episodes, please remember to rate and follow our show. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.